Duke men's basketball picked up a win last night, 81-72 over Ohio State in the ACC Big Ten Challenge. Big victory for John Shire and company as the Blue Devils returned from the Phil Knight Invitational. Good to be back inside Cameron Indoor Stadium. The Blue Devils are now 7-2 overall on the new season, ahead of the ACC opener coming up on Saturday against Boston College. We've got a lot to discuss on today's show, so let's get right to it.
Hi, everybody. Dick Vitale. Hey, make sure you listen, man, to Locked On Blue Devils with J.J. Jackson. He's awesome, baby.
You are Locked On Blue Devils, your daily podcast on the Duke Blue Devils, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Hello, everybody, and welcome into another episode of the Locked On Blue Devils podcast. My name is JJ Jackson. It's so great to have you here with us on today's show. Locked On Blue Devils is a daily podcast devoted to everything going on in the life of Duke athletics. You can follow us on Twitter at LO_Blue Devils, and I'm on Twitter at _JJ_Jackson_. Be sure to follow our podcast for free on whatever podcast platform you choose. You can watch the show daily on YouTube as well. Be sure to subscribe to the video version of our podcast on YouTube each and every day. Share it with your friends. Your support means the absolute world. On today's show, we're going to be talking about the Duke men's basketball team following their 81-72 victory over Ohio State inside Cameron Indoor Stadium. A big shout out to Dick Vitale, who does our intro here for Locked On Blue Devils. He was back inside the venue as an analyst for the ESPN broadcast, his first trip back to Cameron Indoor since prior to the COVID-19 pandemic. And Dickie V had a bout with cancer during that time frame as well. So what a joy it was to be able to hear his voice back inside Cameron. So without further ado, let me bring on my good friend, Josh Cox from Duke Football Talks Section 17 podcast. You got a chance to be in the building last night, Josh. What was it like?
Oh, man, it was great to see Duke get back on track. Answer some questions maybe that fans had after that loss in the PK 85 tournament over the weekend. And the offense seemed to answer and respond, and the defense stayed stout. And so it was a really fun time. And like I said, I think some people may have had some questions even about Coach Shire and the way they were going to make some adjustments. And I think we saw them last night in that game as Duke, came away with, not just a victory, but, really they never let Ohio State, within 5 or 6 points there down the stretch. And so I'm not going to say it was like a dominating victory, but it was definitely the game was in hand throughout the entirety of the second half.
Really cool environment to watch on television. One thing to be there in person, a big focal point of the broadcast was that this Duke men's basketball team in Cameron Indoor Stadium saw their 495th consecutive home sellout, a record in the sport, professionally, collegiately. We've always known Cameron Indoor to be the greatest environment in all of college basketball, but numbers like that are just absolutely astounding. And I know we went through pandemic years where you can't have everybody in the building, but to still have a streak like this and to see Cameron being back to what it is as the toughest place to play in the sport, that was really fun to watch on television.
Yeah, the environment last night was just – it was vintage Cameron. It was loud. A shout out to the students. They had the whiteout last night, and it was just – they were ready to go. I do want to give credit to the students as well. I have been a little bit, I guess the word is critical, over the last, say, 5 years or so, even pre-pandemic, of just kind of the energy level, the commitment level from the students being a little lower, and to the point where there were oftentimes, empty spots in the student section, and they're selling those tickets then to the Iron Dukes. And so you're seeing like grandpas, in the student section, if you look closely during ACC games and whatnot. But it seems to be seems to me that there's a re-energizing of the student body. And I don't know if that has anything to do with the coaching change of maybe just that younger, fresher take, and the students maybe responding well to Coach Shire, Jay Lucas, Emil, those kind of guys. I don't know what it is, but credit to whoever it is spearheading kind of this resurgence of the Duke student bass in Cameron. They're even doing things like this, JJ, during timeouts. The band's playing certain songs, and historically, there have been chants and cheers and motions that go along with those songs. And since the pandemic, for sure, it's like the students missed that year, and it's like they didn't know what to do, and like it was just not the same. So they're even having band members come out and lead the students in those chants and those cheers and those hand motions, showing them what to do. And so, like, it's like there's a legitimate concerted effort in like we want to get the student support and the student base in Cameron back to what it used to be. And man, last night, I mean, it definitely was there. I mean, they were all over. I forget the guy's name, but number 13 for Ohio State last night. I mean, they got on him when he airballed a shot, and they did not let up until he eventually, I think he ended up fouling out or whatever happened to him. And I mean, they were all over him. So it was vintage Cameron, loud, energetic. As you said, Dickie V was there. It was like 2015 all over again or something.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? It felt like 7 years ago in Cameron.
And it's the ACC Big Ten Challenge, of course. Duke lost to Ohio State last year in Columbus. They had a 15-point lead in the second half. The game got away from Duke. They did not score in the final 4.5 minutes, and Ohio State had a big upset. That was not the case last night, and what an environment it was. So much so, after the fact, Ohio State head coach Chris Holtmann continues to endorse these true home-and-home games as opposed to some of the neutral site settings that we see from time to time in basketball. Earlier this week, we got big news about an ACC-SEC challenge set to begin. Of course, both conferences have a massive TV deal with Disney and with ESPN. But I really am a big fan of when you can go to places that you're not accustomed to. And for those Ohio State players, they grew up watching TV. They know that Duke is on television a whole lot. They've seen Cameron Indoor on the screen themselves, and to actually be there in person, I'm sure that was a cool feeling for a lot of people.
Yeah, I mean, and the stars from each individual schools came out. I mean, we ran into Joey Galloway, Evan Turner, a couple of guys like that, Ohio State alums that were there in Cameron last night. And then, each game Duke announces, different former players that are back. And this game had, I believe there were 7 or 8 former players back, including Robert Brickey, Ricky Price, guys like that aren't necessarily at every game. There are some players that kind of are at every game. But it was really neat. It was like I said, it was kind of had that old school feel to it. Cameron was tough, man. The fans, I believe, made a difference last night, and the atmosphere definitely was at top-notch Cameron.
We got to talk about some of the on-the-floor products, some impressive performances, and more from last night's win. Duke 81-72 over Ohio State, and we'll do that in just a moment. Today's episode of Locked On Blue Devils is brought to you by our friends at BetOnline. You know that we love our friends over at BetOnline, the #1 source for sports betting information, stats, news, and analysis. Get the latest odds and trends for every professional and amateur league out there. From football to basketball to soccer and esports, we've got it all at betonline.net. And if you love sports podcasts, you could find those at BetOnline as well. We're always the fastest and easiest way to get your betting fix. Head to the website today or use your mobile device to learn more. BetOnline, where the game starts. Moving forward here on today's episode of Locked On Blue Devils, JJ Jackson alongside my buddy Josh Cox from Duke Football Talks Section 17 podcast. He's on Twitter at Joshua Cox. Duke wins last night 81-72 over Ohio State. Kyle Filipowski leads the Blue Devils in scoring once again. 16 points, 7 rebounds. Jeremy Roach was impressive, 13 points to go along with 5 assists. And then we saw a career high from Dereck Lively II, 11 points to go along with 5 boards, including making his first shot that was not a dunk on the season. Took him 10 field goal makes before he makes a shot from the floor that isn't a dunk, which was great to see for Lively. Who stood out to you individually, Josh, of those guys?
Well, I mean, as you just ended with, Dereck Lively played his best game by far so far in his Duke career. Heading into this game, understanding that Ohio State's strength is Zeb Key down low, I full well expected this to be a Ryan Young game, and it wound up being a lot of Ryan Young. And by the way, he played great. But Dereck Lively really did make his presence felt in that game. as you mentioned, scored his first point without a dunk. But I love the fact that he's shooting the ball well. I mean, he was 3 for 3 from the foul line. It was just a great game from him. Overall, I mean, here we sit in this game, 5 players in double figures for Duke, plus Jacob Grandison with 9 points. So we were 1 point away from having 6 players in double figures. And so that, shout out, to the squad and to John Shire and the rotations and the things that he's doing there, because it seems to be very balanced. Another player that stood out, I mean, at the end of the day, Filipowski, man, like he didn't hit a 3-pointer last night, which was, he usually hits one, especially early. Typically he's hit an early 3, but he is the best player on the court. Like when you're at the game and you were watching these teams play, he is the best player on the court. And I got to give a shout out to his defense. He's not the quickest guy in the world, but he is 7 foot tall and he can move his feet good enough and he has great hands. And so he is not a liability on defense like I believe many people may have thought he would be, and rightfully so. Yeah, I mean, those 2 guys, Lively and Filipowski, man, I got to give them their due. And Duke really rode those guys, Filipowski a lot in the first half, but really rode those guys to a semi-commanding victory. I mean, Duke let Ohio State get maybe to 5 points a couple of times in that second half, but it never got closer than that. And I felt like the game was kind of always in hand in the second half.
Talk to me about 3-point shooting, Josh, and what did you see here for Duke? A 5 of 13 are the numbers there. You mentioned Filipowski, who's been one of the top 3-point threats for the Blue Devils this season, doesn't make one. But the last game we saw inside Cameron Indoor was against Bellarmine and a Duke team that took 30-plus attempts from 3-point range. So many of those were wide open looks, and we talked about that after that game, that it's not necessarily a criticism that they took so many shots, but only 13 3-point shot attempts, 13 3-point shot attempts. That's easy for me to say last night for Duke. Did it feel like that was a concerted effort? Are you giving more credit to Ohio State for what they were doing there? Is this a just weird slip up compared to what we've seen in the rest of the season? What'd you notice from 3-point shooting wise?
Well, I think it's just the level of competition. I mean, between a Bellarmine and Ohio State plays much better defense, and they did last night as well. They defended the 3-point line very well. I will say, even of those 13, I'd say 3 or 4 of them were like they were pull-ups at you're like, man, that's a bad shot. And we were able to get the ball to the basket, and we were able to get out in transition, and we were able to do all those other things that we didn't have to rely on the 3-point shot. Now, with that being said, Mark Mitchell made a very big 3-point shot in the corner in the second half. But as you mentioned, he caught it in rhythm, catch and shoot. He wasn't trying to create his own shot. It came to him. He hit it. Tyrese Proctor hit a couple threes. Similar fashion. It was on ball reversal, ball movement. He was open. And so to me, if those shots are available 30 times a game, have at it. But if they're only available 12 to 15 times a game, let's only shoot 12 to 15 of them. Does that make sense? Let's take what the defense gives us, because this team can score on the inside and on the outside. And so I felt like last time was fine. I mean, look, we attacked them down low. I mean, they fouled out how many? 4 players fouled out in that game. And so at the end of the day, we got to do what we got to do to win the game, and we did it last night.
And 16 assists for Duke in the win last night. The ball movement was really impressive for the Blue Devils. Let's talk a little bit more about Mark Mitchell and Tyrese Proctor, and we'll talk about those guys in particular after our last time out here on today's show. Thanks for watching and listening to Locked On Blue Devils today, and making Locked On Blue Devils your first listen. For your second listen today, make sure you check out our Locked On Sports Today podcast. From the games that matter the most to the biggest stories in sports. We've got the college football playoff. We'll see that set on Sunday with conference championship games straight ahead this weekend. The NBA continues to move forward. The NFL, a big matchup tonight between the Bills and Patriots. We're talking about it all on Locked On Sports Today. Go beyond the scoreboard and behind the scenes with local experts and insights only Locked On can provide. Locked On Sports Today is available on this app, YouTube, or wherever you get your podcasts. Moving forward here on today's episode of Locked On Blue Devils, JJ Jackson alongside Josh Cox from Duke Football Talks Section 17 podcast. All right, we talked so much about this freshman class for Duke, and so far, last night was the 9th game of the season. There's been so much praise for Kyle Filipowski, and rightfully so. You've got Jaden Shute and Christian Reeves, who just don't factor in right now at this point in their career and at this point in the season. And then you've got Dereck Lively II and Dereck Whitehead, who are working back from injury, getting more and more comfortable out there on the floor. And then, like we've discussed here on the program, you've got Tyrese Proctor and Mark Mitchell, who've had up and down performances throughout the season. Mitchell scores 16 against Xavier. Proctor's not really involved. Mitchell not really involved in the Purdue game, but Proctor goes out and scores 16 points against the Boilermakers and looked like one of Duke's best players on the floor in that one. Their performance last night, Josh, and then all in all, what are you thinking out of those two freshmen this season?
Yeah, I mean, well, first of all, Tyrese Proctor, again, last night was very important to Duke's win. He played a lot of minutes. He played, I believe, 27, 28 minutes, something like that. And he shot the ball well. I think he was perfect from the foul line. He hit a couple threes. He makes some very, very good passes. I mean, underrated. Well, I'm not going to say underrated passer because he came in with that kind of with that reputation. But I mean, his dump off pass to Ryan Young last night was a thing of beauty when he got doubled. And so I think I've made this known on here. I'm a Tyrese Proctor guy. Like, if you ask me, like, my favorite player to watch, like, when he's on his game, I will say Filipowski's gaining on him.
Yeah.
But Proctor's still the guy. When Proctor, man, he has some step backs and, like, he has some, like, NBA level, talent and plays that he makes. And so I believe Tyrese Proctor will just continue to get more consistent. And I think that's, as you mentioned in the question, really, that's what Duke fans are looking for, is consistency from Proctor. And instead of, 16, 12, and then 2,
right,
it's like, let's keep that consistent
level
if
it
at all
out,
possible. Yeah. And so, that's what we're looking for. With Mark Mitchell, it's much of the same. It's just a little bit more drastic. I mean, Mark can be very engaged in the game. He can take the ball to the hole, draw fouls. He's very lanky and long and awkward and athletic all at the same time. But then he can get inside of his own head and he can make some mental mistakes. He can fall asleep on defense every now and then, which is actually a strong suit of his, is defense. And I thought, by the way, I felt like that he handled suing last night better than anyone for stretches. And so, like, I praise his defense. But at the end of the day, I think part of this is John Shire is choosing to play Mark at kind of a 3 spot. And if you were to take Mark's game at face value, he's really a college 4. And so, and maybe we'll see him more at the 4 as the season progresses. But I believe if he were able to play that stretch 4 or play on that, just play with 3 smaller guys than him, I believe we'd see more production from him. So at the end of the day, I'm fine. I think he's good. I mentioned he's a junkyard dog. He could lead us in scoring. I don't think that's going to happen anymore with the way Filipowski's playing. But I do believe that as the season progresses, he's the offensive rebound guy. He's the steal guy. He's the get out and run guy. And once again, it's just going to be consistency. Man, these are kids. Yeah. This kid's 18, 19 years old, humble kid. He is just a great kid to be around. And, he'll figure it out. He'll figure it out for sure.
And then right now it's 9 players that you're trying to factor into a rotation, sometimes 9, 10 players. Insane to make that happen. Only the 9th game of the year. So many things are still trying to get played out and that sort of thing. And that was always one of the criticisms of Mike Krzyzewski that I think Duke fans would have, is how short the bench could get from time to time. We're currently seeing that in Chapel Hill with the team who went to the national title game a year ago. They're strictly playing 6 players, no matter what. Hubert Davis has his 6, and nobody else is playing. And the Tar Heels, by the way, have now lost 3 straight games, a far drop from that number 1 ranking in the country, which I know Duke fans absolutely love. But with this Duke team in particular, as more games come into play, I think you'll see more guys continue to get more and more comfortable. Some games you got it, some games not, but you've still got to overall in the flow of the team be as consistent as can be.
Yeah, and I mean, if you look at what we said earlier, here we sit with 5 guys in double figures with a 6th player with 9 points. And so this team is built to absorb the inconsistencies because we are not star dominant. There's not a hero player on this team, right? There's not like one guy who has to be the alpha on at every game. And so at the end of the day, we are built for it to be okay for Mark Mitchell to have 16 points one game and 3 points the next game, because Jacob Grandison could be the exact opposite and he could have 3 the previous game and drop 16. And so, I'm not complaining. Let's put it that way. I'm definitely not complaining. I did want to mention, highlighting this game, he looked like maybe he was still nursing that toe a little bit, but Jeremy Roach struggled a bit throughout the game and he was a little off. But, man, when it mattered the most in that second half run, when we needed to make sure that we kept that 5 to 7 point cushion, Jeremy hit some really incredible shots. He's got that Chris Paul. I hate to put him in that same category, but he's got that Chris Paul mid-range, and, man, he's got it down pat. And so, kudos to him as our leader and team captain. When we needed him the most, he would get, for once, a Duke player was seeking out the mismatch, and he was getting the switch with Zeb Key, and he was taking it to Zeb Key. And so, man, that happens to Duke all the time, or has in the past. It's nice to see us hunting the mismatch and seeing Jeremy score like that.
And yeah, Roach in particular, at the end of the first half, as Duke again had a 10-point lead at halftime, won this game by 9, had that play right towards the end, driving to the rim, went up with the right, switched hands midair, and unbelievable play to make the bucket, get fouled, go to the free throw line, and make it as well. The show's almost over today, and we've yet to mention Jalen Blake's, but I saw Blake's last. We talked about passing. There was one point, top of the key, rifled a pass in to Ryan Young, who was able to lay it in right away. So sharing the basketball is contagious. Folks that maybe you're not necessarily expecting to make the greatest passes in the world end up doing that. But I wanted to give Jalen Blake some love right there as well.
Yeah, and I don't know if it translated on TV as it did in person, but you mentioned Blake's pass to Ryan Young. In the second half, with 3.5 minutes to go, Ryan Young pulled down the greatest offensive rebound I have ever seen in person. I'm not a big cheering guy at the game. I sit there. I'll clap, and every now and then, we get one of those runs where we get a couple of defensive stops and we hit a couple of threes. I'll get up and cheer, shots going off, during the timeout. I'll get up and cheer for that. But that's typically it. That offensive rebound got me out of my seat and cheering last night. So he had great position, and he was just not going to let anybody else get that ball. And so shout out to him, man. Has he not been a breath of fresh air for Duke?
Awesome.
I know we can laugh at his game. It's got 40-year-old YMCA player written all over it, and that's fine because my man gave us 10 points, 5 rebounds, 2 assists last night. I'll take it all day. Look, he is the perfect balance to a Dereck Lively. He really is. You have Dereck Lively with all the potential and the athleticism, and we need that. But then you've got that grinded out, old school, below the rim post player. And so he's a perfect complement to this team, and he's been an incredible addition.
Ryan Young can absolutely play, that's for sure. All right, Duke basketball Saturday. We're going to see the ACC opener, a home game against Boston College, an afternoon game. A lot of people will be consuming conference championship weekend in football, but we're seeing conference play open up in the ACC this weekend as well. Duke and Boston College, a team that Duke's going to be favored against, a Boston College team that is struggling a bit out of the gates. But nonetheless, you got to take care of business, got to make sure the focus is there and that sort of thing. And we're still trying to get used to it's December 3rd, or will be December 3rd on the calendar on Saturday. And we're going to be watching an ACC basketball game.
Yeah, I mean, this is where it matters, right? I mean, at the end of the day, we play for championships at Duke, and so that regular season ACC championship is one of them. And so I would look to see even a renewed focus on that. The ACC is a little bit odd this year. I mean, you've got Virginia right now that seems to have separated itself a tad bit from Duke and UNC. As you mentioned, UNC's on a 3-game losing streak. Let me repeat that. UNC's on a 3-game losing streak. It's interesting when the target is on your back preseason number 1, as it is for Duke. Typically, yeah, it's very interesting when that
Something to
target
live
gets
up
really,
to,
really
yeah.
big. Yeah, but anyway, I expect Duke to come out and play really well against BC, and I believe we'll get off to a great start. I don't see any reason why we wouldn't.
And then next Tuesday, a game against Iowa in Madison Square Garden, a game next Saturday at home against Maryland Eastern Shore, and then we are into ACC play for good. That's a look at the schedule ahead for Duke men's basketball. Josh, as always, it's fun to chat with you, fun to talk about basketball with you, and hey, we'll be back at it tomorrow. You and I are going to talk a little Duke football. So thanks for the time again today on the podcast.
Thanks, JJ. Have a great day, man.
That's my buddy Josh Cox from Duke Football Talk's Section 17 podcast. Be sure to follow their work at Duke FB Talk on Twitter. Follow the Section 17 podcast as well, wherever you get your podcasts. Leave a 5-star rating and review. And also give us a follow on podcasting too. Give us a 5-star rating. Subscribe on YouTube. Follow us on Twitter at LO_Blue Devils. And I'm on Twitter at _JJ_Jackson_. That's going to do it for today's show. As always, go Duke. I'll talk to you tomorrow. My name is JJ Jackson. Thank you and good day.